Well, welcome back from lunch. One of the things that we need to convey to the internet audience is that we did have what for lunch? Kale. Kale. You only understand the importance of that if you were here for my lecture yesterday. We had kale for lunch. We also had, it was one of our favorite lunches at the 10-day program, but we don't serve it the first couple of days because it's so simple. It's just a lunch of grains, of rice, for example, with various kinds of vegetables and a little, you didn't eat that peanut sauce, did you? Yeah, there was peanut sauce there. And you throw a little sriracha on that and some of those tofu cubes and a little kale, and oh boy. That is one of the, I would say that's the favorite lunch at our 10-day program. It was so simple, people new to this kind of eating, they would, if you invited somebody to this weekend, and you said, oh, by the way, you're going to get a lunch of kale and rice, they might have backed out. But since they tried it, I'm sure they enjoyed it. This is a movement, a huge movement that we're involved in, and you've seen in your own lives and at this weekend the contribution that many people have made in terms of helping others and ultimately changing the world. And along my journey, I've met several people who have made a major contribution, but one person particularly stands out in my mind. This is a woman who's been very active in many careers in her life and is very dynamic and is, well, I don't want to mean this in any way unkindly, but she speaks clearly, just like I speak clearly. She speaks very clearly and sincerely and investigates her journey along the way and the science and the ways to improve her personal health she's extremely energetic. She was here about 4 or 5 years ago as a speaker, and since that time I've seen many, many changes in our next speaker in terms of her personal health and also in terms of the way she's been able to help others. Many of you know her, and if you don't know her, you need to get to know her and work with her in terms of accomplishing your personal goals as well as your community goals. I'm very excited about hearing what Chef AJ has to tell us about her journey and an important message about how we can help ourselves and our community. Chef AJ, please come on up. And the other thing, this may be an inappropriate comment, but I'm allowed to do this once in a while. She looks phenomenal. and you know, if I brought out the videos from last time you were here,
right.
I like your new diet.
Thank you so much, Dr. And thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you for having me at the Advanced Study Weekend. You know, I speak at a lot of conferences, I really do, and I think that the McDougall Advanced Study Weekend really is the gold standard of all the plant-based conferences. And I mean that sincerely, and it's really an honor to be here. And thanks to all of you for coming, and anybody watching at home, hello. So 6 months ago, Dr. McDougall contacted me about speaking at the Advanced Study Weekend, and I was so excited because I had presented here twice before. The first time in 2009 at the Celebrity Chef Weekend, and the second time in 2011 at the Advanced Study Weekend. And both times I did a lively culinary demo. This is actually the coat that I wore. And you can see it doesn't fit me anymore. But when he asked me to come as a speaker, I was over the moon, because for the last 15 years since becoming a chef, I've spoken about the miracles associated with a plant-based diet. And just this year, I joined the 21st century and put all my presentations on PowerPoint. And excitedly, I mailed Dr. McDougall 4 of my best lectures, and I said, which talk would you like me to give? And he said, none of them. He said, I want you to tell your story. I want you to speak from your heart and tell the parts of your life story that are interesting, that would be relevant to the audience, and that would allow them to lead better lives. No pressure there, Dr. McDougall. So I decided to speak about something that I'm asked about all the time, how after 50 years of failure, I finally lost weight and kept it off. So today I'd like to talk about how I went from being a fat vegan to a skinny bitch. Now, my husband says the title is misleading because I have always been a bitch. Thank you. Is there anyone here that has ever wanted to lose weight or struggled with their weight or suffered because of their weight? Good, because if nobody raised their hand, I'd have to go to that paleo conference up the street. Oops. For over 50 years, I was either overweight or obese, suffered from emotional eating and severe food addiction, until I learned the secret to ultimate weight loss, which I'm excited to share with you today. But the truth is, it's really not that much of a secret because Dr. McDougall has known it and has been teaching it for over 40 years. The photo on the left was taken in 2003 when I was 43 years old and weighed 165 pounds. The photo on the right was taken in 2013 when I was 53 years old and weighed 127 pounds. I'm now 55 and a half years old and I weigh 117 pounds. Yeah, thank you. Now, if you look closely to the photo on the left, I'm standing next to an 800-pound cow, and just to be clear, the cow is on my left. I was born on the south side of Chicago in 1960 to a morbidly obese mother and a normal weight father. If one of your parents is obese, you have a 40% chance of following suit. And if both of your parents are obese, that risk increases to 80%, whereas slim parents have about a 7% chance of having an overweight child. Now, I know I didn't win the genetic lottery, but my genetics only loaded the gun. It was my deplorable diet and lifestyle that pulled the trigger. Both my mother and grandmother loved to eat, and they were excellent cooks, and they passed that trait on to me. I love how Houston plant-based cardiologist Dr. Baxter Montgomery says that it's really not the diseases that are hereditary, but the recipes. And my family sure had their share of delicious but unhealthy ones. You see, we didn't just follow the standard American diet, we followed the standard American Jewish diet, which is higher in dietary fat and cholesterol, so it kills you that much faster. I still have very fond memories of eating dinner on Friday night, Sabbath dinner, at my grandparents' home. My bubby made the best chopped liver. She was famous for it, with real chicken schmaltz. Now, if you don't know what schmaltz is, it's the kosher version of lard. It's just as bad for you, but it's been blessed by a rabbi. I remember after dinner, my grandmother would pour her homemade chicken and matzo ball soup in glass jars, and as it would cool, a layer of fat this thick would congeal over the top. I vividly remember her injecting her very round belly with insulin and somehow thinking that this was normal. She also suffered from congestive heart failure, diverticulosis, and myriad other lifestyle diseases. She wore supplemental oxygen and had a full-time nurse living with her. As a young child, I remember visiting my grandfather, who was a medical doctor, in the hospital after his first open heart surgery. And this once vibrant man was now sick and weak and pale, and he remained in that condition for months after the operation. He also suffered from cancer and Parkinson's disease. My own father, who had cancer, died from complications due to failed open heart surgery, and it would have been a blessing had he died on the operating table, because instead, he languished for 3 weeks in an ICU, attached to a respirator with his hands tied down so that he wouldn't pull out his tracheostomy or his feeding tube. He couldn't speak for the last 3 weeks of his life, but his eyes spoke volumes, and they were filled with terror. He also had cancer. As a young child, I remember a vehicle called a pulmotor, which was the ambulance of yesteryear, pulling up into our driveway almost every week, administering supplemental oxygen and nitroglycerin to my dad, who had his first heart attack before I was even born. While my father wasn't overweight, he loved kosher salami made by Sinai 48, and every day he would have a piece this thick, trading slices for years off of his life. My brother, who was a medical doctor, died 2 years ago at the age of 61 from pancreatic cancer, shortly after having his first stroke after becoming an insulin-dependent diabetic. Morbidly obese from a young age, I actually sent my brother one of Dr. McDougall's books in the 80s. He sent it back to me unread with a note that said, "Can't eat carbs, they'll make me fat." And I felt like saying, but you're 300 pounds, obviously something else you're eating is making you fat. But what was really interesting is that 2 times in my brother's life he lost weight. The first was at Duke University Hospital when he underwent the rice diet pioneered by Dr. Walter Kempner. and the second was before his son's wedding when he did the Dean Ornish program. My mother also died from complications of her morbid obesity, and for the last 4 years of her life, I was her primary caregiver, and it was horrific watching her deteriorating. She was on over 20 medications for lifestyle-related diseases, and because she had advanced dementia, she required 24-hour care, which literally broke the bank. All of my loved ones were either fat or sick, or fat and sick, and I was led to believe that this was hereditary, that this was the normal consequence of aging, or as my parents put it, the vagaries of old age. Little did I know that every disease, disability, and all their suffering was caused by their lifestyle, and it would have been completely preventable and largely reversible. From as early as I can remember, my mother was always on a diet. She faithfully attended weekly Weight Watchers meetings, weighed and measured all her food diligently on a postal scale. My mother was on the Scarsdale diet, the Stillman diet, the Atkins diet, the cabbage soup diet, and the grapefruit diet. She even belonged to an organization called TOPS, T-O-P-S, which stood for Take Off Pounds Sensibly. There, they assured her that carbs were the villain, and that if she ever had a hankering for pasta, to merely steam some bean sprouts and pour marinara sauce over them. And by the way, that tastes absolutely disgusting, just so you know. She even resorted to having injections of the urine of pregnant women done daily. But despite all her valiant attempts at weight loss, she kept getting fatter and sicker. The only time in my mother's life that she ever lost weight was before my brother's wedding, in the hospital under a medically supervised fast. But the minute the wedding was over and she began eating again, all the weight came back on, and then some. What I remember most about my mother were the 2 scars she had on both sides of her neck, like Frankenstein, from where the vascular surgeon sliced into her and sucked all the plaque out of her carotid arteries. And my greatest fear in life was that I would end up like her, and it began to look like that might happen. I was fat for as long as I can remember, which was from the age of 5, and I learned very early on that being fat was definitely not good, especially for a female. Both my uncle and grandfather were medical doctors, so whenever I were to get sick, my mom would just call them on the phone for the treatment plan, or they would come to my home. Well, one time when I was 6 years old, they were both attending a medical conference and they weren't available. And I got the flu and a fever of 104 degrees. Well, in the early 60s, doctors still made house calls. So my mom called the pediatrician of my cousin Betsy, who was 4 years older than me and very, very petite. I still remember the doctor's name, even though I'd only seen him once, Dr. Charles Goldenberg. After he took my temperature, he pulled the covers off of me, and he took one look at me and shrieked and said, "Oh my God, her thigh is the entire size of Betsy." I knew right then that being fat was not okay, and that somehow I was not okay. And I was constantly being reminded of that fact by my 2 older brothers, who said that guys don't go out with fat girls. And apparently they were right, because I never did get invited to my senior prom. It's okay, the story has a happy ending, don't worry. I swear. September was the month that I dreaded most, because it meant going back to school and buying new clothes, because last year's clothes no longer fit. And not because I was getting any taller either, because I kept getting wider. I still remember a rude sales clerk who said to me, "If you get any fatter, we're not going to be able to accommodate you in the children's department. You're going to have to shop at Lane Giants." She was referring to Lane Bryant's, which is a plus-size women's clothing store. Plant-based pediatrician Dr. Jay Gordon has often said that a fat kid never has a good day at school. And while now 1 out of every 3 children under the age of 18 is obese, that wasn't yet the case in the 60s. In a classroom of 30 to 40 kids, there was usually only 1 kid who was fat. And that kid was me. If there was another fat kid, I was in luck, because I'd have a friend. Sometimes I'm amazed how I even survived my childhood, especially the taunts from the female physical education teachers who humiliated me because my thighs were so fat and they rubbed together in my gym shorts. What's interesting is that if I could somehow magically transport my childhood self to today, I'd probably be considered normal. When I was 11 years old, my parents sent me to California to live with an aunt and uncle. You see, after the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the racial tensions on the south side of Chicago escalated so that it was no longer safe for me to go outside and play or even walk to school. So now I traded my standard Jewish American diet for one that was even richer, a gourmet French diet. You see, my uncle attended medical school in Geneva, where he met my Aunt Ramon and fell in love and married her. My aunt's mother, Maymay, lived with us, and Maymay was a graduate of the Cordon Bleu and owned a Michelin 3-star restaurant in Switzerland. Every single meal was a fine dining experience. I grew up eating kosher food, and now I was exposed to new foods that tantalized my young taste buds. I started eating foods like prosciutto and melon, beef bourguignon, soufflé au grand marnier. Yeah, we ate potatoes, but they were pommes frites, fried in butter and oil, or au gratin potatoes cooked with cream and butter and bacon and cheese. After rich meals like cheese fondue made with kirsch liqueur and Gruyere cheese, we sometimes would eat a small salad, which completely violated my rules of eating food in accordance with increasing calorie density. Desserts were even richer, things like chocolate mousse or Negresson chemise made with real heavy whipping cream. After school, I ate the traditional Swiss snack, bread and chocolate, which were sandwiches of Nestle's Crunch and Wonder Bread. And if you haven't tried them, they're delicious. Every day, my aunt would give me $1 to buy lunch at school. But instead of buying food, I spent it at the student store and bought candy. Candy bars were only a nickel back then, and $1 sure bought a lot of candy. I still remember my 3 favorites as if it were yesterday: Abba Zaba, Banana Now and Later, and the Triple Decker bar. Does anybody remember the Triple Decker bar? It was made by Nestle, and it was a veritable chocolate sandwich: dark chocolate, milk chocolate, and white chocolate. At the nutrition break, I would buy a piece of coffee cake this big for only a dime. It looked like it could feed a family of 4. And what's funny is the LA Times recently published the recipe of the LAUSD coffee cake: flour, sugar, butter, oil, baking powder, baking soda, salt, and a little cinnamon. My uncle must have noticed that I was getting fatter. And for the first time in my life, he put me on a scale and weighed me. And I was shocked to discover that at the tender age of 11, I weighed 160 pounds, which is more than Dr. McDougall weighs now. I was not yet even at the height that I am today, which is 5'6" tall. He then said something to me that would forever change the course of my life. And if you're a parent, I don't recommend you say this to your child. And if you're a doctor, please don't say this to your patient. He said, "You're so fat that I bet you could go a whole week without eating, and you would be just fine." And so I did, and spent the next 7 years battling anorexia nervosa. When I was 17 years old, I left Los Angeles to go to Philadelphia to attend the University of Pennsylvania to fulfill my lifelong dream of becoming a veterinarian. But instead, I became a vegetarian. You see, as a pre-vet student, we were required to work for a veterinarian. And the first day on the job, he handed me a tank of live salamanders, and he asked me to cut their heads off. He said he was doing protein lens regeneration experimentation in the amphibian, and he only needed their eyes. Well, this was before PCRM and Neil Barnard existed. And so I decapitated one of these defenseless creatures, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life. I immediately started vomiting. I went to student health, and I promised God that I would never harm any of his creatures again. So in that moment, I became an ethical vegan. But even though I would permanently abstain from animal products, all I kept eating was junk food. And so I remained fat. After my junior year in college, my anorexia got really out of control. My hair fell out, I lost my fingernails, my period stopped. I had bruises over my entire body, a gastric ulcer, and an enlarged liver. And I was actually suffering from a severe protein deficiency. Now, please understand this had nothing to do with my being vegan, because it is absolutely impossible to be protein deficient on a vegan diet if you're getting enough calories. But I was starving nearly to death. The doctor said if I lost 1 more pound, he would have to admit me to the hospital. And sure enough, I did. And I was admitted to Hahnemann University Medical Center. But the problem is that anorexia was considered a psychological disorder. So I was put in the locked ward of a mental hospital, along with people who were criminally insane, and my roommate was an arsonist. I did not sleep a wink the entire time I was there, and thankfully my sister-in-law Lauren came from Pittsburgh and flew me to Los Angeles, where I was admitted to another psychiatric hospital, which was marginally better than the first. There really wasn't good treatment for eating disorders in the 70s. The goal was just to get the patient to gain enough weight to leave the hospital, but they never dealt with the underlying cause of the disease. Kind of sounds like a lot of doctors now, right? I don't know if you remember comedian Buddy Hackett, but he used to say that his mother always gave him two choices for dinner, take it or leave it. Well, that's sort of how it was the way they treated anorexia, but it was take it or tube it. You see, you either ate the food they gave you, or they shoved a tube down your throat and force-fed you like a goose being fattened for foie gras. Once, after refusing to eat, I was put in 5-point restraints for over 5 hours. Now, in case you don't know what 5-point restraints are, that's when 2 psychiatric aides, who look more like NFL linebackers, come and hold you down and put 2 leather straps over your wrists and your ankles and a bigger leather strap over your abdomen so you can't move. I told them I was vegan and I don't wear leather. They were not amused. After being left in that state for over 5 hours, my will was broken and I lost all resolve, and it was very, very traumatic. So I decided to just eat and get the heck out of the hospital as soon as possible. But I still never learned what to eat. So I was abstaining from animal products, but instead of eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, which is what I eat today, I ate from my own 5 food groups: candies, cakes, cookies, pies, and ice cream. But they were vegan. I had been starving myself for so long that once I started eating, I literally could not stop. And within 2 months, I gained over 60 pounds and ballooned up to 180 pounds, which officially put me in the obese category. I became so depressed that I attempted suicide. But an angel was looking out for me, and I made it to the hospital in time. Now, I've never told anyone that before, and as a matter of fact, my husband, who will be watching this later, this will be the first time he's heard it. And the reason I decided to disclose this very personal information that no one except for my immediate family knew is because since coming out as a food addict 2 years ago, I've received hundreds of emails for people who suffer from this disease, a disease that is not yet widely recognized by the larger medical community. Food addiction is a real disease. It is chronic, progressive, and often fatal. And I have received hundreds of emails from people who said they have contemplated suicide because of this disease or have known people that have committed suicide. And I want them to know that no matter how long you have suffered from this particular disease, there is always hope, but it starts with getting the food right. In hindsight, a suicide attempt was not a smart move for someone who disliked mental hospitals. Just saying. In the next loony bin, I met a male anorexic who was all too eager to share with me his weight loss strategies. He told me you could eat anything you wanted as long as you only chewed the food and didn't swallow. He taught me how to purge, how to stick my finger down my throat and vomit. He suggested I take laxatives and diuretics, which I did, and I intentionally started smoking cigarettes to reduce my appetite. I also became a compulsive exerciser, blowing out my knee with step aerobic classes. While being anorexic was certainly not a picnic, and I was cold and weak and tired all the time, all I really had to do to maintain the disease was simply not eat. But bulimia was a full-time job, which required gargantuan efforts 24 hours a day to maintain. And still, with all these Herculean efforts, I couldn't get my weight down any lower than 150. And I maintained that disease for 6 years. But in 1985, a happy accident occurred. I sustained some serious rib fractures. I say a happy accident because sometimes when things happen to us that seem bad, we look back on them and they actually were a blessing. In the 80s, they treated rib fractures differently than they do now. And so what happened was the orthopedic doctor wrapped me very tightly from my hip to my breastbone in tape and then added a rib belt. Well, rib fractures are really, really painful. And taking even the slightest breath was excruciating, so I could no longer smoke cigarettes. And because my abdomen was wrapped so tightly, I couldn't binge. Well, after 6 weeks of not smoking and not binging, my health started to improve, and so did my self-esteem. And it was at that time that I sought spiritual help and did what every addict at some point must do to gain recovery. I asked God to please take away this disease. I said that I would accept any weight He would give me if I could just learn to eat like a normal person. In hindsight, if I actually knew someone was listening, I would have asked for any slim weight. Thankfully, after I stopped smoking, I only gained 10 pounds. But once again, I was back to 160 pounds, the same weight I was as an 11-year-old child. And I somehow believed that this was my natural weight, what I was destined to weigh, and there was nothing I could do about it. It would be another 10 years before I ever addressed my weight problem again. But 1995 was a very good year. I finally graduated college, I married my husband Charles, and Fen-Phen was prescribed to me by my doctor. This miraculous drug allowed me to eat whatever I want and still lose weight, because I never was hungry. Instead of eating 6 vegan cupcakes with buttercream frosting and sprinkles, I was satisfied with 1. And instead of drinking a 48-ounce Dr. Big Gulp, I only needed to drink a 12-ounce can. You see, the drug tricked my brain into thinking it was full. But I learned from Dr. McDougall that a low-fat, starch-based diet does exactly the same thing. I was on cloud 9 with my new figure because it was so easy to obtain and maintain. I was only a few pounds more than I weigh now, until the fateful day that I walked to the mailbox and there was a letter from the FDA. Apparently, some people had sustained severe heart-lung damage from the drug, and they ruined it for all of us. I was instructed to immediately stop taking the drug and see a cardiologist. I had an echocardiogram, and thankfully I had not sustained any damage. But now I couldn't get any doctor to prescribe the drug for me, and by then I was addicted to it. I was able to locate phentermine, half of the potent drug cocktail, from another country. But without the fenfluramine, it just didn't work. As soon as the last traces of drugs left my system, so did my newfound slimness. Twice in my life now, I had lost weight, once from starvation and once from a dangerous drug. But in both cases, it was unsustainable. It was fleeting, and the weight came back as quickly as I put it on. And each time, I ballooned back up to 160 pounds. I began to believe that being slim just wasn't in the cards for me, and that the set point theory must be correct. But I've since learned from Dr. McDougall that it is incorrect, and that if you eat a low-fat, starch-based diet, you can reset your set point. Still, it would be almost another 20 years till I ever attempted to lose weight again. But thankfully, for a series of fortunate events, over the next few years, I would be led in the direction of optimum health. On January 1st, 2003, I woke up bleeding profusely. My grandmother had died of colon cancer, and my uncle had just had 80% of his colon removed from the disease. I went to my HMO and requested a colonoscopy. They said because it wasn't a first-degree relative, they weren't required to perform that procedure, that I should just go home, I probably had hemorrhoids. Well, I knew it was much more serious, and so I fought them for 6 months until they finally did a sigmoidoscopy, which doesn't even go all the way up the colon. Sure enough, it was much more serious than hemorrhoids. What I had, my sigmoid colon was riddled with many large bleeding edematous polyps, the kind that if not removed, 100% of the time turn into colon cancer. But even with the prep I did that is supposed to clean you out, the doctor said he could not remove them because my colon was in such a state of ill health and was impacted with stool. He said I was going to have to come back and have abdominal surgery. When I was a teenager, I underwent a minor operation and became allergic to the anesthetic. I remember waking up in the recovery room, being resuscitated by a team of respiratory therapists, and staying in the hospital for 6 months until they could get my breathing under control. Because of that, I developed a phobia to surgery and anesthesia. So instead of having an operation, on July 6, 2003, I checked into the Optimum Health Institute in San Diego with a Coke Slurpee in one hand and a Dr. Pepper in the other. But it was the first time in my life that I ever heard let alone from a doctor and a nurse, that what we eat actually has a profound effect, not only on how we look and how we feel, but what diseases we get and what diseases we can reverse. Even though I had abstained from animal products for 26 years, my daily diet of sugar, flour, oil, caffeine, and chocolate were contributing to my state of ill health. And I was put on a diet of raw fruits and vegetables, sprouts, and fermented seeds. For the first 43 years of my life, the only greens I ate were in a bag of M&Ms. And I'm not kidding. I thought Skittles were a fruit. Now, please understand that I am not advocating a raw food diet because you will starve. You cannot get enough calories just eating fruits and vegetables. You need the starch for satiety. But I will say that anytime you get away from the standard American diet, your health will improve, as my health did. So, in 6 months of following this diet of fruits and vegetables, seeds, and sprouts, I went back to my HMO. Once again, I asked for a colonoscopy. They refused, but they did a repeat sigmoidoscopy. And as luck would have it, it was the same doctor. Now, he had photographs of every single polyp. He knew exactly what their size and their location was. But when he did the procedure this time, he said that my colon was clear, clean, pink, and vascular like a newborn baby. And he asked me where I went to have surgery. And I said, I didn't have surgery. He said, well, where are all the polyps? And he was angry. He kept poking me. And I said, well, I changed my diet. And he said, well, that's impossible. And he got mad and he walked out of the room. There was another doctor assisting. She appeared to be from India. And as soon as he was out of earshot, she whispered, I believe you. Eating a raw food diet definitely improved my health, but it did nothing to help my weight. I couldn't get enough calories from fruits and vegetables, and since I was told not to eat potatoes, rice, and beans, I ended up eating more calorically dense foods like dried fruits and nuts, which never satisfied my hunger drive or allowed me to lose weight. In 2008, I saw a video from a new kid on the block, Dr. Caldwell B. Esselstyn, Jr. He talked about preventing and reverse heart disease, and he said not to eat oil. Now, I understand that Dr. McDougall had been saying for years that the fat you eat is the fat you wear, but I never really thought about it in terms of disease prevention and reversal. But something in that video clicked, and on August 1st, 2008, I stopped eating all processed oil, as well as sugar, flour, and salt. But I still didn't lose weight. Does anybody know why? Say it. Say it. Exactly, nuts. You see, even though oil is the most calorically concentrated food on the planet, with no fiber or nutrients at 4,000 calories a pound, if you switch from a 4,000 calorie a pound food to nuts, which are 3,000 calories a pound, almost as calorically dense, of course, you're not going to lose weight. But still, my health and brain chemistry continued to improve. In February of 2010, I had another happy accident. I slipped on a wet floor and badly fractured my left knee. In the emergency room, they gave me a brace and crutches, but because I was so fat and didn't have the upper body strength, I couldn't use them. So now I was in a wheelchair for 3 months. I never wanted to be in that situation again where I couldn't take care of my own needs. I couldn't go to the bathroom. I couldn't bathe myself. And I vowed that when I recovered, I was really going to do something about this problem. But my recovery was slow and painful, and working as a pastry chef around rich desserts didn't help. Often I would have to stand for 10 or 12 hours a day, and my left knee would swell to 3 times its normal size. The doctor wanted to do surgery, but because of my fear of anesthesia, I refused. Then he said something that would really get me thinking. He said, because I had gained 5 pounds in the wheelchair, and he said, for every pound you're overweight, it's an additional 5 pounds of pressure to your knee. And then he said, have you ever thought about losing weight? God, I wanted to smack him. But I said, no, I never thought about it. But you know, the wheel started turning. Later that year, I started filming a YouTube show called The Chef and the Dietitian, and you can still see 65 episodes on my website, eatunprocessed.com. After each episode was filmed, we sent it out to our mailing list and also posted it on Facebook and YouTube. Invariably, someone would make a comment, usually a male, that would say, if the vegan diet's so good, then why are you so fat? I felt like saying, I don't know, why are you such an asshole? But my husband would delete the comment before I could. Still, I began to wonder if I was eating an unprocessed, whole food plant-based diet without sugar, oil, flour, or salt, why was I so fat? Well, the following year, I began to uncover the answer. So if you've been sleeping, time to wake up, because here's the solution. In January of 2011, I went to True North. Now, I wasn't going there for weight loss. You see, 4 years prior, after the death of my 4th child, I was put on psychiatric medication. I had developed panic disorder and agoraphobia so severe that I could not leave my house for an entire year till I got a service dog. But I didn't like being on medication. And if you are on them, please read the book Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker and find out the truth about them, because if I had known, I would never have gone on these highly addictive drugs, because they're very, very difficult to get off. And if you're not on them, please read the book before you consider going on them. I went to True North because Dr. Goldhammer said that he had some success with panic disorder using fasting. But when I got to True North, because of the medication I was on, the medical doctors would not allow me to fast. But it was there that I would meet the person that would put me on the path to eternal slimness. And that person you will hear from tomorrow, and that's Dr. Doug Lisle. I worked with Doug for about 8 months and finally got off the psychiatric medication, which was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And you know how bad my life's been up until now. They say whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But in November of that year, we finally started addressing the weight. One of the great things about my job is I get to work with really cool people like Doug, and we were doing a job together in November of 2011. And on a break, I said to him, I said, Doug, I know people probably tell you this all the time, but I swear I eat perfectly. I eat a whole food, plant-based, unprocessed diet free of sugar, oil, flour, and salt. I no longer eat chocolate. I do not eat dried fruit. All my nuts and seeds each day are carefully measured out, and I still can't lose weight. So this is what Doug said. He said he knew a guy that wrote a book that was coming out next year, and that the book would explain scientifically why I couldn't lose weight. The guy was John McDougall, and the book was The Starch Solution. Doug explained to me that I was currently eating about 30% of my calories from fat, and if I wanted to lose weight, I would need to eat about 10 to 15% of my calories from fat. So he asked me to do an experiment. He said for 30 days, just see how it goes. I thought this was silly and that he was being ridiculous. So I took his bet and I raised him. I said, okay, Doug, I'm gonna do your stupid experiment. I get home from True North from working at the Holiday Extravaganza on January 2nd. And for 90 days, I'm gonna do your silly experiment, because 90 days from January 2nd is March 22nd, which happens to be my birthday and Heather McDougall's birthday, in case you wanted to know and get us any presents. And on my birthday, I'm gonna eat a rich date nut dessert and just show you what an idiot you are. Well, for the next 12 weeks, I abstained from eating all nuts and ate potatoes instead. Anybody guess what happened? I lost weight. 1 pound a week, 12 pounds. I continued abstaining for nuts for the next 2 months, so now 5 months, 20 weeks, and I lost 20 pounds. And that's when I ran into Jeff Nelson of VegSource. He hadn't seen me in a while. He said, my God, you look great. What are you doing? I said, well, I'm just not eating nuts. I'm eating potatoes instead. He said, well, I got to run a story about that. Well, he ended up running 3 stories, which you can still read on his blog, vegsource.com. And apparently, they struck a nerve with a lot of people. Before I lost weight, people were criticizing me for being fat. But now, people, including medical doctors, were criticizing me for killing people by telling them not to eat nuts and accusing me of joining the ranks of the misguided and dangerous low-fat camp. Dr. McDougall, do you have any idea who they're talking about? Many people commented on the blog that there was no way I could lose that much weight simply by not eating nuts, and they actually accused me of having gastric bypass surgery and plastic surgery. Is Garth still here? Garth Davis? Can you please come and just examine me and show people that I have not had either of those? You know I'm afraid of anesthesia. I mean, believe me, if I could, I would. I continued to eat nut-free. And now it's August of 2012. And I run into Brian Wendell, the executive producer of Forks Over Knives, at a fundraiser. And this photo was taken of me. I had gone from a tight size 14 to a loose size 10. I had lost 25 pounds. I was about 140. I felt good. I was happy. People told me I looked great, and I thought I was done losing weight. But I kept not eating nuts and kept eating potatoes. And by November of 2012, I had lost 33 pounds. I now weighed 132 and was a size 8. And I was able to keep that weight off for a year. Oops, sorry. These pictures were taken exactly 2 years apart at Healthy Taste of LA. Picture on the left, eating nuts, and the picture on the right, eating potatoes. Now, I want to go on record for saying that I never said nuts were unhealthy and not to eat them. But I just don't believe that they are this magical food. And I certainly don't believe that they facilitate weight loss in any way, shape, or form. If you can eat them and be happy with your weight, knock yourself out. But if you look like this, you may want to consider cutting back. That was definitely what I looked like. Now, in November of 2013, I had maintained my weight loss for over a year, 132 pounds, size 8. But I still felt like I was overeating. And I truly was eating all the vegetables and potatoes that I wanted. But now that I was slimmer, it didn't feel good overeating. And really what I was overeating on was fruit. And I sometimes would eat as many as 5 bananas a day. So I talked to Doug about it, and he said, "You're not eating enough starch." And I said, "But Doug, I swear, I'm really eating all the potatoes that I can." And he said, "Well, why aren't you eating any other starch?" Old beliefs die hard. And I said, "Because carbs make you fat." Now, I figured somehow magically potatoes were able to bypass this law, but that I really believe that carbs, this is what I was taught, this is what I believe, this is what my family believed. And so what Doug said to me is that I want you to do an experiment. I was scheduled to work at True North for 5 weeks. Now they serve the same kind of diet at True North as here. It's a low-fat, starch-based diet. And at breakfast they serve oats that's either sweetened with fruits or a plain made with water. They serve all kinds of delicious grains like black rice, red rice, brown rice, and wild rice at lunch and dinner. Now, Doug was right about the last experiment, so I decided to trust him. And he said, "I want you to eat all the grains you want the 5 weeks you're at True North." And he said, "What I think is going to happen is this." He said, "Either your weight is going to stay the same, or you'll gain maybe a pound." So for the next 5 weeks, I ate rice with abandon. Can anybody guess what happened next? I lost weight. In 5 weeks of stuffing my pie hole with rice, I lost another 5 pounds. And now I was down to 127 pounds in a size 6. And I love Doug, but the problem is every time I do an experiment, it costs me money because I have to buy new clothes. I simply could not believe what was happening. So I decided to run an experiment of my own. And I wanted to test out the hypothesis made by Dr. McDougall 40 years ago. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. One day at True North, Chef Bravo made my favorite meal, the scored potatoes. And by the way, these earrings were also made by Chef Bravo. He takes organic Yukon Gold potatoes and cuts slits in them, seasons them perfectly, and bakes them to perfection. So you have these crispy potatoes that taste like potato skins. And with it is served guacamole, full-fat guacamole. Now, True North is a low-fat, starch-based diet, and so avocado rarely appears on the menu there, maybe once a month. But when the patients saw these tubs of avocado, they were literally filling half their dinner plates with avocado. Now, Dr. Goldhammer doesn't monitor your food there. But that day when he gave his lecture, he casually said, "Does anybody know what a serving of avocado is?" And no one raised their hand. And he said, "It's 2 tablespoons. And I raised my hand and I said, "Per chip?" He said, "No, per day." I lived next door to Trader Joe's, and when I got home from True North, I looked at a package of commercial guacamole, and sure enough, it said that a serving was 2 tablespoons. Now, it wasn't like I was obsessively eating avocado, but I wasn't avoiding it either. I would have a couple of times brown rice avocado sushi, a couple times per week. I would put a slice of avocado here and there on my salad, or I would take avocado and mix it with peas or beans to make a lower fat topping for my potatoes. I decided to stop eating avocado for a month and see what would happen. Can anybody guess? I lost 3 pounds, and now I was down to 124 pounds. So I decided to run one more experiment, but this time I contacted Dr. McDougall first. I was still eating seeds because I was led to believe that you needed to eat flax seeds, chia seeds, or hemp seeds every single day to get your essential omega-3 fatty acids. And I was still eating a little bit of tahini on my greens because I was told that you don't absorb the carotenoids in your greens without some fat. Now, I know we have a lot of doctors here today. How many of you have ever hospitalized a patient for poor carotenoid absorption? So I wrote Dr. McDougall and I said, are you sure it's okay? Is it really safe to really eat a diet with no added fat? And in his usual style, he emailed me back within 7 seconds with one word: yes. So I decided to go a month without eating any seeds of any kind. And can you guess what happened? I lost weight, 3 more pounds. Now I was down to 121 pounds in a size I had never worn before, a size 4. The first time that I bought a piece of clothing with a size small, the label was on the outside, and I left it there for a whole month because I couldn't believe it. In case anybody is worried, I did have my omega-3 fatty acid levels checked, and they are fine. And just to be safe, I eat a green called purslane, which is the highest source of omega-3 fatty acids, much higher in omega-3 fatty acids than either nuts or seeds. So I just wanted to go on record to say that Dr. McDougall was right. He said he wanted this on his epitaph, but it was much cheaper to put it on an apron. Okay. Oh, thank you. That's so kind. Many people, including some healthcare professionals, have warned me that eating a low-fat diet and recommending it to my clients is extreme. But as John Irving says, good habits are worth being fanatical about. It has taken me over 50 years of doing everything wrong to finally learn the secret of ultimate weight loss and become thin. But luckily for you guys, there's a quicker way. You see, 20 years ago, there was actually a book written that explained everything I did. But the sad thing is that when my mother died, I found this book on her bookshelf. And she had never read it. And unfortunately, either did I until I lost weight. I've only been thin for 3 years now. I'm what you might call the nouveau thin. But the best part is now I get to help people attain the health and the body they deserve. Using the McDougall program for maximum weight loss and my other favorite book, The Pleasure Trap, as the foundation, plus everything I have learned from the leading experts in food addiction, I've created the Ultimate Weight Loss Program, which includes ongoing group support. We have about 700 people now doing ultimate weight loss. And here are pictures of some of them as they undergo their transformation. If any of you would like to join me in becoming a skinny bitch or bastard, all you have to do is eat a low-fat, starch-based diet. That's so important what I just said, to eat a low-fat, starch-based diet, that I wrote a little song so that you would always remember, which I dedicate to Dr. McDougall. I'm an eater of potatoes. I eat potatoes every day. They're the reason that I am so trim, and this is what I get to weigh. Hey, 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 John McDougall has a plan based on carbohydrates. If you eat them, you'll be thin and won't have ass or thigh weight. John McDougall, he's the man. He's as smart as Plato. Eating starch will make you thin. Just eat a damn potato. Thank you. I forgot, I don't have, a lot of people say you didn't show pictures when you were very fat. Both my mother and I, we were in the Northridge earthquake, and our apartments were red tagged, so I don't have pictures. But I forgot, I do have a pair of shorts from when I was at my heaviest. So, any questions? I'm almost out of time, but does anybody want to ask me anything? Oh, okay.
Everybody's attention.
Okay. If anybody would like to ask any questions.
Just from my own personal point of view, I really never expected such a phenomenal presentation. It was really amazing. Thank you, AJ.
Thank you.
AJ, I will second Dr.
Wow.
I will second Dr. McDougall's compliments. What a wonderful, beautiful, and courageous presentation.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for sharing your
thank
experience.
you.
and your
My
heart.
to be complimented by your heroes like that is like just unbelievable. Thank you so much, Dr. Clapper.
I would just like to tell everyone that her experience has been absolutely valid, but the problem is not the nuts and the seeds and the avocados. And nuts and seeds and avocados absolutely can be part of a healthy diet that leaves you nice and slim and trim. And if you come to my lecture tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., I will explain the biochemistry of how to eat nuts and without gaining weight, and why she had trouble, and why you can avoid that. So I don't want anybody leaving here saying that nuts and seeds are evil, I must never eat them again. You absolutely can eat them, but you have to know how timing in life is everything. So this story is to be continued. But there's great truth in what she said, and I have great appreciation for what you said.
Thank you. I think they're evil. Oh. Hi.
Hi, what's the difference between the McDougall diet and the Ultimate Weight Loss diet?
Not really much, because the Ultimate Weight Loss Program is absolutely based on everything I learned from reading the McDougall Program for Maximum Weight Loss and everything I learned at True North. The only difference is that we ask people to eat 2 pounds of non-starchy vegetables, and people say, well, that's anti-McDougall. And being accused of being anti-McDougall is worse than being accused of being anti-American. And the truth is if I loved Dr. McDougall any more than I already did, Mary would come up here and smack me. The reality is that if you think about non-starchy vegetables, they're 100 calories a pound. And if you ate 2 pounds of non-starchy vegetables a day, you would be eating 200 calories a pound, 200 calories a day. That is not a vegetable-based diet. The Ultimate Weight Loss Program is a starch-based diet. Almost all our calories come from starch. The reason we ask people to eat 2 pounds of non-starchy vegetables a day is, number one, because we're dealing with food addiction. And what we found, and by the way, the science for this will be explained very soon with a gentleman that I'm interviewing on my podcast, Healthy Living. But there's something in vegetables that cuts the cravings for sugar, because almost everybody in the Ultimate Weight Loss Program is a sugar addict or a sugar and a flour addict. And there's something in vegetables that cut the cravings for the crap. And so we ask people to include at least 2 pounds of these non-starchy vegetables and to eat them first and to eat them for breakfast. Now, as weird as that sounds, I've traveled all over the world now, and every place except for the United States eats vegetables for breakfast. Everywhere I have spoken, in Mexico, and by the way, I don't speak at vegan places. I speak at regular places, but I happen to be a vegan. When I was in Japan, I was served rice, miso soup, and salad for breakfast. In China, pickled vegetables. In Korea, kimchi. In Denmark, even though it was herring, it was cucumber, tomato, in onion. In Mexico, they served me beans, corn tortillas, and vegetables. The United States is the only country where breakfast has to be something sickly, sweet, and sugary, and caffeinated. And so in order to reverse food addiction, the last thing we want to do is give you a sweet breakfast. So we ask you to start your day in a savory way. So eating 2 pounds of vegetables a day, 200 calories, does not mean it's a vegetable-based diet. And it's certainly not against Dr. McDougall's principles, because in the Maximum Weight Loss book, he says, fill half your plate with green and yellow vegetables. Well, I live next door to Trader Joe's, and when I buy a 1 pound bag of Brussels sprouts and I roast them in my oven, the yield from 1 pound of Brussels sprouts is a cup. 1 pound of vegetables cooked is a cup. So I don't see how eating 2 pounds of vegetables a day is not the McDougall program. So there really isn't a difference. It's just that we are a program that people have to sign up for, and we give content and videos and DVDs and things like that. But I mean, I've been accused of cloning his program. Of course, I mean, it is his program. And if you come to my program, you know that his book, just like The Pleasure Trap, is required reading. And yeah, it was Pritikin's program too. It's a low-fat, starch-based diet. So if you're on the McDougall program, you can do ultimate weight loss and vice versa. The only thing is we don't use any flour or any sugar, because you have to understand that for food addiction, it's a horrible name, food addiction, and it's really refined carbohydrate addiction, and sugar and flour goes through the same refining process as drugs and alcohol. So we don't use any of those, as well as alcohol. But it's a great question, and it's the same. It's, you know, I changed the name, you know, but I mean, and you know, what can I tell you?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So hard to see you.
And AJ, thank you for pointing out something very important. You know, I stand on the shoulders of many important people. You mentioned Nathan Pritikin, and Walter Kempner has been brought up here, and Dennis Burkett. There are many. They happen to all be men, and you know, maybe you'll be, for our next generation, the woman that has added to this contribution, this battle. You know, the truth is the truth, and it's always the same, and it's existed for thousands of years. And each of us, as many of the speakers so far in this program, each of us has our own way and our own chance to present that truth from our own point of view. There's really nothing original I've done, or you've done, or Dr. Clapper's done, or even Nathan Pritikin. I know he learned it from other people too. It's just that we all have to get together and in our own way tell the people around us, tell the rest of the world what the right way is for people to eat, how to solve these health problems, and you know, stand up like AJ and myself and the rest of the folks who've done it. Stand up and tell them. You know, we have a world to save, a population of people to save, and put your personality, your talent in there, and just go for it. AJ, thank you very much. That was an amazing presentation.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a 15-minute break.